Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Once a DJ. If you'd like to support the show, then head to onceadj.com/support to find out how you can help. If you'd like to get in touch with any feedback or suggestions, email onceadjpodcast@gmail.com. Once a DJ is produced by the good people at Remote Control. If you'd like to find out more about working with them, head to remote-ctrl.co.uk. Time for the show. Welcome back to Once a DJ. I'm here with DJ Step 1, aka Paul Terzulli. In addition to DJing, we're going to be discussing his first generation music blog, Only Built for Z-Share Links, and his book, Who Say Reload, which covers the stories of classic jungle tunes and recently had an accompanying record series released. How you doing, Paul?
Yeah, good, thanks. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, no, thanks for coming on. It's I'm looking forward to having a chat on this one because we've not really gone down the jungle route or done anything in that sort of world on the podcast yet. So I do really want this not to just be the low hanging fruit for me. That's hip hop and funk DJs, battle DJs. I want to cover as broad a range as possible, and I think the more that I do with that, the more that I will learn, and the more learning opportunities it gives for everyone who's listening as well.
Yeah.
So let's go from the top then. How did you get into DJing?
I was really young when I kind of discovered what it was. I got into music in like 88, like late 87, but I was only about 10. But I got a tape with my first Walkman, which was Hit 7, which was kind of like a Now album, just a chart compilation. And that had the Cold Cut remix of Paid in Full by Eric B. and Rakim, which was, I had no idea what it was at the time. Obviously, I just got this chart compilation, but, it's obviously quite a groundbreaking record, a lot of like kind of carb samples and things, and also it's obviously got Rakim on it, so it's amazing. So I was kind of drawn to that. It was on the second side of the first tape, and they kind of grouped together a lot of the dancier soul funk stuff. So it was, apart from that, I had Donna Summer, Alexander O'Neal, Chic, Prince, all that kind of thing. But that was the only hip-hop tune on that side. But at the time, there was a lot of hip-hop in the charts and a lot of early house. So if you pop on top of the pops, you might see like De La Soul, Salt and Pepper, Public Enemy, Rebel MC, all this kind of like slightly commercial hip-hop, but also quite credible at the same time. It was still early days of hip-hop, so there wasn't that big divide between mainstream and underground like there would be later on.
You used to get a lot of like Brixton remixes and like London remixes on things like that, didn't you?
Yeah, there'd be a lot of UK only remixes, which, mixed results sometimes, some of them others. But sometimes it'd be like, if you heard that version first, and especially if you're quite young, you'd be like, I like that version. And I remember getting the Eric B. and Rakim album, and none of the remixes were on it. There was an I Know You Got Soul one, which Norman Cook did, which used I Want You Back by the Jackson 5, and that wasn't on there. Yeah. And I was like, I don't like this other version. It takes a while to kind of understand what's going on and how everything works, I guess.
He did some of the more tasteful remixes, didn't he?
Yeah, although, since I've been online, you kind of start to discover that the older guys and the purists hated all that kind of what they considered to be watered down. They wanted the originals.
Right.
Whereas, I've kind of, like I say, it's what you hear first a lot of the time is the version you like the most.
Yeah.
So there was that. So just a lot of stuff on top of the pops. Obviously there was no MTV, so you're kind of limited as to what music you see on TV. I found a radio show on Radio 1 hosted by a guy called Jeff Young, who was like before Pete Tong, he kind of like did their dance show. And he was playing a fair bit of hip hop, and then he had an hour after his show was set aside. It was called National Fresh. Or the Big Beat Show. I kind of forget how it worked, but he'd play a lot of that. So that was the first place I had Public Enemy. He had Ice-T being interviewed on there. It's the first place I had Ice-T. And he'd also play all the acid house stuff that was coming out, just anything that was kind of new and, dancey, I guess. But it was on late. I'd have to get my mum and dad to like tape it for me so I could listen to it in the morning. So you had to kind of put in quite a lot of effort, really. But as I say, there was stuff available in the mainstream. You just had to kind of find your way a bit. And I was an only child. I didn't have like an older brother or anything that could
Yeah.
showing you what was what. You start finding radio shows. Then Hip Hop Connection came out. You start finding out a bit more about, other acts that maybe like weren't in the charts, and just picking up things in record shops that looked interesting. Usual thing.
Did you grow up in London?
No, I was grew up in Surrey, just outside London. So, but in an area where there was literally no kind of scene of any sort. I mean, especially when you're that young, like before you even hit your teens. So, but there was, a few kids at school start listening to it, and you swap tapes and usual thing, really. But I think by the early 90s, I'd kind of found Westwood and Max and Dave on Kiss, and then you start finding the proper stuff. I kind of stopped listening to house music after a bit. I'd say by like 91, I kind of wasn't really interested in the dancier stuff for a bit. But at that age, you still kind of know what's in the charts. Everybody just knows what's out, so you kind of hear certain things you liked. All my friends were listening to like all the early hardcore rave stuff, like the Prodigy and that kind of thing, so I was kind of familiar with that still.
Yeah, just thinking about that with the mentioning of like the UK remixes, house, hip house, crossover.
Yeah.
Do you think that period around the late 80s in England, it kind of all came together and exploded in different directions? There was the big musical crossover. And do you think it's fair to kind of compare that in a way, maybe not quite the level of impact, but with like New York in 77, how you had sort of this like melting pot.
Yeah.
And then it kind of went off into into the disco, the punk and the house. I suppose over here we went into the baggy, which went into the indie, and we went into the dance music.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. You do get these sort of periods where everything kind of meets. Even about, 10, 15 years ago, there was a lot of DJs playing what ended up being known as bass music. And you'd hear like dubstep, drum and bass, techno, kind of all messed up for a while. I think that period in the late 80s, if you listen to like DJ sets, you'll hear, especially like pirate radio tapes are always a good point of reference, I think, because the DJs will maybe be a bit more adventurous sometimes, being on radio rather than trying to fill a dance floor, But you'd hear the up-tempo hip-hop like Big Daddy Kane or Sugar Bear, Don't Scandalise Mine, and then you'd hear some house stuff which wasn't far off the same sort of tempo, and they were kind of mixing it all up. And then obviously the hip house was already a mix of the two. And then I guess from that, styles start to split a bit and people find their niche,
Yeah. So in terms of sort of collecting records and things, going from that early musical interest, at what point did you get decks or get on decks?
Man, that took ages because I guess I couldn't kind of justify to my parents why I needed two of them. We had like a record player, I had a little stereo, and I can see, looking back, it's quite a big spend for a young kid of something that they might grow out of in 6 months. So I didn't get my decks till 95, my first summer job, and I got some belt drives. But I did have a sort of decent little pile of vinyl by the time I got my first set of decks. So I got some belt drives in 95, and then just over a year later, I managed to upgrade to the Technics that I've got now.
Were you just buying hip hop then, or were you buying all sorts?
Buying all sorts, really, because there was a lot of good music around. That I was talking to my wife about this the other night. It's easy to kind of dismiss it as looking at it with, this was a great time in your youth and all the music was amazing, but there was a lot of good music in the 90s. There was a lot of genres were birthed. Things were kind of changing every kind of 18 months.
Yeah.
So I'd buy like certain house records still if I heard something I liked. It was mainly hip hop, a bit of R&B at the time. I've always been quite keen on secondhand stuff and bargain bins where you can kind of take a punt on something if it looks interesting. So, if I can find like a record shop with a box of 12 inches for £1, I'm more than happy, to rummage around in that. So I'll buy a bit of everything, which a lot of people I found wouldn't, because they'd kind of think, right, I'm going to be this type of DJ and I'm only going to buy these records. Whereas I saw it as, well, if I just keep buying a bit of everything, eventually I'll have enough to do a little set of, these genres. And at the time, hip hop and R&B were sort of quite closely linked. All the R&B stuff had hip hop beats and hip hop remixes. So yeah, a bit of everything really. And I had friends all listening to different things. This was sort of the plus side of growing up in an area that didn't really have a scene of any sort. I'd have like friends at college that listened to grunge and Britpop, and then my friends that where I lived on the estate were all listening to rave and hardcore and jungle. I was one of about 2 or 3 people still listening to hip hop in 92, 93, I think. But yeah, I was sort of exposed to a lot of different stuff, I guess.
Were like the rave sort of scenes pretty big then? Because it was a lot of parties around the M25, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think thinking about it, my friends that were into it probably all had older brothers and sisters that maybe would have been going to those sort of things.
Yeah.
So my best friend Kevin, he was sort of getting tapes from his sister, and then he gets stuff off pirate radio. But yeah, it was the era when people started collecting flyers, buying record bags, the old MA2s with the logos on the back. And there was just a lot of compilations. You could go into like Woolworths or WH Smith's at the time and pick up a, Chaos Theory or Best of Rave or all these sort of Strictly Underground compilations. So, on the estate where I lived, hardcore was like the big thing. I remember being, everyone was getting like Dreamscape and Fantasia, Helter Skelter, World Dance, all those sort of things. And I wasn't really that into it. It was kind of a bit too hectic and a bit too different to what I was listening to, which at the time I guess would have been like Dre, Snoop, Tribe Called Quest, just whatever hip hop was out.
Yeah, so quite laid back sort of stuff.
Yeah, it was just, not really, I don't know, it was different to 89, I guess, whereas, like we were saying, it was a little bit more in sync. But there were certain things I liked. I sort of liked the stuff that maybe had the reggae samples, or certain things where I could pick out hip-hop samples, just stuff you can identify with a bit more.
So did you get into jungle as it evolved, or were you later coming back to it?
Yeah, I suppose I kind of got into it around about the time it was blowing up. So my friends that was buying the tape packs, at the time the raves were still quite mixed, so 91, 92 in the hardcore scene, all the DJs are kind of playing vaguely similar sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And then it starts to splinter a bit, but the raves are still booking the same DJs, even though they're playing very different kind of styles. So my friend might get a pack and he'd sort of have the ones he wanted to, and you get 6 or 8 tapes, because it'd be a recording of the whole night. And he'd be like, oh, you might like the Hype tape, you might like this Randall tape. And the DJ Hype tapes especially were like the kind of ones I really got into. So
yeah,
I think 94, I had like a few tapes off them, and I'd picked up a couple of records that I'd found cheap.
Do you think with the DJ Hype it's the scratching?
It was that, and he was just very I don't want to say he only played anthems, but I think the records he was playing became anthems partly because he was playing them, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So when you listen back to him, it sounds like it's a Jungle Classic set, but at the time it was all brand new,
Yeah, I suppose because with me, with DJ Psy, because I used to listen to it was a few years later than that, but with the hardcore packs and things like that, it was more. I remember always preferring the sort of jungle sets in them and the drum and bass sets.
Oh.
But DJ Psy was a big one for me because he was doing the scratching. Yeah,
a lot of my friends were into him, and he had a house tape as well with a lot of scratching on it, which was really unusual. You didn't hear house DJ scratch.
Oh, nice.
Which is quite well known, and it's probably online somewhere, but I remember my mates were playing that quite a lot. So yeah, Hype, and then I kind of couldn't really tell what was going on a lot of the tapes. It was kind of, you didn't always know what these tunes were. There's no track lists. It's quite difficult to find out what was happening. So started going to a few shops, but those shops back in them days could be quite intimidating. Some of them, all the records are behind the counter. They've got like 3 out on the shelf and everything else is behind the counter. So you kind of start to try and figure out what's what. And there was a few like compilation CDs, and then eventually obviously it all went mental and General Levy and all that came out, and it became a bit more easy to access certain things and find out what they were, I guess.
Yeah. Was that because at that point I was reading the General Levy M-Beat section in the book?
Yeah.
Because it's just a banger, isn't it? And I was just having a flick through because I've read a few of the chapters, and then I got onto that, and it was talking about how that was like the kickoff for really the mainstream adoption of jungle.
Yeah, I mean that was the first one to kind of hit the charts and get to the point where you'd have just people that listen to chart music buying that song. It's kind of like the jungle equivalent of Rapper's Delight, I guess. It was probably like, if you hadn't been exposed to it beforehand, that was probably the first one you heard. That or maybe Original Nutter, but that didn't chart quite as high. Although it's maybe a slightly more credible tune. It's a little bit harder.
Yeah, I think the other one that I'm aware of was Baby D, Let Me Be Your Fantasy. I don't know if you'd quite call that jungle, but...
Yeah, I mean, that was a funny one, because that came out in 92, but they re-released it and it charted in 94. That was when it got to number 1. So it kind of like, it's been this big record and then it charted again, so it kind of got a second lease of life, and I guess it was kind of grouped in with that a bit. It's not the sort of tune you could mix with jungle, slightly slower. It must be like I don't know what it is, 140 maybe. But yeah, it was sort of probably appealed to the same sort of audience in terms of people listening to the chart music that maybe liked the more mainstream dance stuff. Yeah, they'd have been buying that. General Levy, Prodigy, whatever else was kicking around at the time, I guess.
Yeah. So when did you start playing out live, and what was early DJing like for you?
My first time I played out was like really early '97, and I'd started hanging around at this record shop in the town where I grew up in Camberley. So a group of us would kind of just go and hang around in there and listen to tunes and pick up. And somebody came in and said he was putting on an under 18s event, and he wanted my friend who was working in the shop to play, and then he sort of suggested a couple of other people, and we ended up going and doing that. It was probably a bit of a mess. I don't think we had a monitor. It was, but it was quite busy. I got paid, which is better than some of the other things that followed, I suppose.
How old were you at that time then?
I'd have been, what was that, 90? I'd have been like 18, 19.
How did you feel about doing an under 18s event then? Were you excited, or did it feel like, was there any kind of negative perception for you of doing that? Because when you're aspiring to be a DJ, there's a bit of ego going on, or with a lot of people, I should say.
I think I was just happy to be playing out because there weren't too many. This is growing up in a town where there's like one club at a time, and it just played like cheese.
Right.
So somebody asks you want to DJ somewhere, and this, I remember like the first few years, literally, I was one of these people. Any opportunity you get, come play that. When we do a house party, I'll pack all my stuff up and bring it over. And
yeah, so did you do quite a lot quite quickly from there, or was it just kind of?
No, because there just wasn't much going on. And I was still obviously buying a lot of hip hop, which at the time you couldn't go and play in like a high street bar or anything. So this is like late 90s. It still wasn't, we hadn't had Neptunes and Nelly and Ja Rule and that to make it, where you could just pull up at E8's Wine Lodge or something and play that for a couple of hours. So no, it was kind of like sporadic. We did a bit of pirate radio around about 99. So the pirate radio thing was cool. It was like a station. My friend Jack, the guy that was managing the record shop, he initially set it up in like 92 or 93, I think. And he decided to dig his transmitter out, and we managed to start running it at weekends. Which, it's quite exciting at that age to like get on the ads. Now it's quite easy to kind of get a radio show online. You can just kind of find one of the several thousand internet stations. But we did that for a bit.
Was there a lot of chase from the police with that then?
No, none at all. I think it was so unusual for that to happen in that area, and we weren't bothering anyone, and we mostly got left alone. Although we did find out years later, my friend was chatting to somebody from the DTI, and yeah, they did know we were doing it, apparently. But we used to move it around each weekend, so we were like quite responsible with it. We weren't like on air swearing and all this kind of thing. We weren't cutting into anybody else's frequency. So yeah, that was quite cool. It was probably about 95% UK garage on there at the time, though, for the like 4 or 5 months it ran.
Yeah.
Occasionally I'd like get on and, maybe 2 a.m, play some hip hop or whatever, but generally it was all garage, a little bit of house, and some old school, people would turn up and play like their old hardcore and that.
So at your core, was it always hip hop that was the first love?
Yeah, still, yeah. That's basically what I mostly listen to now, to be honest. I'm not one of these people that's I like a bit of everything. I basically listen to like 90% hip hop when I'm at home or driving around. So it's that's kind of been the one constant through everything, really.
Yeah. So in terms of DJing out, then we had a quick chat the other day, didn't we? And it's quite a big buzzword now, but open format DJing. So kind of a bit of everything, whatever's needed for the situation. As a strong sort of hip-hop head, do you think you ended up going down the open format route just out of necessity in order of that's what you needed to be able to play out?
Yeah, I think I had to kind of figure out how I could play out and how people would enjoy it, because I've always been quite self-conscious when I turn up to play somewhere in that I want people to like it. I've never been able to be one of these people that's like, well, I'm just going to turn up and play what I think's good and, head down. And so I've seen so many people do it. Even now, it baffles me. I haven't got that. I don't know. It's a mixture of either just really strong self-confidence or complete ignorance. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I can't do it. And I'd like always try and focus on the people that might not be into what I was playing. And I'm like, right, I need to, just generally try and be like fairly across the board without playing any shit. It just kind of got a little bit, I don't know, maybe a bit limiting after a while. I kind of thought maybe I could have gone down the route of being a bit more forward thinking and trying to push new stuff. But I think you've really got to be in the right place for that sort of music. And there wasn't a lot of places like that where I lived.
Yeah, and I think if you're not a promoter, it makes it a lot harder as well. Because I think being a promoter is kind of, it's in your personality, I think. It's not something I've ever enjoyed trying to do or done well.
Yeah, I wouldn't fancy
it. So I think if you want to be that person that's like, no, I need to be doing this specific thing, and you're in an area that not a lot goes on like that, you need to be promoting rather than just kind of going to bars to DJ.
Yeah. I mean, if you know people are coming to hear a certain sort of music, that's fine. I think for the most part, you have to be a draw. You have to be like that name on the fly, where if people go and see Andy C or Giles Peterson or, one of these sort of DJs, they kind of want to hear new stuff and they want to be like entertained with what that guy's known for. Whereas if you're playing in the corner of a bar and it's just people coming in from, all sorts of places, they're not looking to be like educated with some obscure like EPMD B-side or something. They just want to hear stuff they recognise. So it's just about getting that balance. And you start to find, as you go on, you think, well, I've played like 2-3 tunes they know I can get away with chucking one in that's not as well known, but they might like, or that fits in with the theme of stuff I'm playing. And the other thing that had happened, obviously, was off the back of UK Garage dying down a bit, that R&B and hip-hop thing became the mainstream thing to play. So then you had like credible hip-hop that you could play out in mainstream bars and clubs, so you could get away with playing like a Clips tune or something like that, which you just couldn't have done 5 years previous. You could play like Noriega or something like that, whereas you couldn't play Capone and Noriega when that came out.
You've just reminded me of one of the first gigs I did when I approached a bar to go and play there. I probably took down about, I don't know, 40, 50 records, something like that. Not a huge amount because I didn't have a huge amount at the time. And it was a bar that was on like a pub run, like a pub mile. What's the word I'm looking for? Pub crawl, that's it. Yeah. So I DJ'd at this pub that was on a pub crawl route, not thinking about that part of it. Went down there with a load of funk and hip hop. And it was just the worst selection of records you could have had for that place. It was absolutely terrifying. And I had to play, I think I had one 2-pack tune with me. I can't even remember what it was. No. And I had to play it at least 3 times because I was like, this is the only thing that anyone here likes. Yeah, it's
good times.
It's difficult when you don't get the bar right for what you've got.
Yeah, I mean, the first time I played in London, I probably had no idea what to expect, but I had thought, well, I've got a big bag of hip hop and R&B, this will be fine. And I'd gone up there with it was from the back of Hip Hop Connection. This guy had said, looking for DJs, and I'd sent him a CD, and I'd only been DJing about a year and a bit. And I turned up at this thing, and it was kind of like the sort of place, like North London, little sort of basement of a wine bar, a little bit ghetto, but I was like, okay, we'll go in here. And the DJs were playing like proper, dancehall, and then they did like the R&B set, and I'd like never been to somewhere like this or heard these sort of DJs, and I didn't really get that there was different types of hip hop for different crowds. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I'd turn up with I was going to like Mr. Bongo and places like that at the time, so I had all my new hip hop bits, but it was like the sort of thing you'd hear on Stretch and Bobbito. It wasn't,
Yeah.
And I remember throwing on like a few things, and it was kind of like, don't really know what I'm doing here. And they were sort of still a bit of a crowd there. And I played like DJ Cool, Let Me Clear My Throat, and that just didn't work at all. That was a bit too rowdy for that sort of crowd.
Right.
And then I think eventually I pulled out Case, Touch Me, Tease Me. And I just started it from the top where it comes in and goes, ding. It's just like a little chord. And when that hit, everybody went, wah! And I was like, okay, I kind of found my little lane now. I can stay on that tip for a bit. But yeah, that was the total eye-opener, And they were going from I think it ran from 11 till 6 in the morning, just different DJs coming up. I think there was like 3 different sort of DJ crews playing through the night, and just seeing like, you know, they ran like a little 80s soul and boogie set at one point, playing like Melissa Morgan and all these like tunes I've never heard before. So yeah, total like different crowd to what I'd get around where I lived, but yeah, quite character building, them sort of places.
Hey guys, I hope you're enjoying Want to DJ. I wanted to create a product for the listeners to be able to support the show and for the guests as a token of gratitude for being on. So I've teamed up with Sure Shot Shop to create some Want to DJ 45 RPM adapter clamps. These are my weapon of choice as a 45 adapter, as they add stability and grip to aid you in any setup. These are available for £25 each plus flat fee postage from wantodj.bigcartel.com. And if you'd like to see the other models you can buy and also customise, check out sureshotshop.com. If you're an avid collector of timeless music on vinyl but don't have the budget to fork out for those pricey originals, then look no further than Be With Records. From library music to yacht rock, jazz, hip-hop, disco and beyond, Be With lovingly reissue some of the coolest classics. All of their records are carefully remastered and cut to the highest standards to make sure the pressings are of peak audio quality and do justice to the music being released. And something else to note is that they don't do limited runs to drive up resale and hype. If the demand is there, they'll repress, as the focus is the music, not the profit margin. They have flat rate shipping and free UK shipping on orders over £60. And if you head to bewithrecords.com and use the discount code ONCEADJ, all one word, you'll get 10% off your order. So head to bewithrecords.com and level up those crates today. Yeah, it's weird. Like I would get really nervous about DJing quite often. Only like I might have booked something a month or two beforehand, but then it's only on the day of or the evening of. I'm just like, why am I doing this? It's all going to go wrong. And then, yeah, once you know that you've got people, you just get this massive pang of relief. It's a pretty nice feeling. You're like, all right, okay,
yeah.
I know which lane I'm in now.
It was one of those things, I think, when I was first started, I was just excited to be doing it. So I didn't get too nervous, even though I probably wasn't, well, I definitely wasn't as good as I would be a few years later.
Yeah.
And then for the most part, later on, I was kind of playing a lot of the same places, so you know exactly what to expect and you're quite comfortable. But now and again, yeah, you'd go like a bit further out and you'd have to turn up somewhere you'd never played before. And then I'd be a bit like, you know, what am I going to start with? You know, where is it going to go? Is it going to be busy? What time? And the timing, you know, if you play at a bar all night, you know when it's busy, when it winds down, you know, so you know when to hit the big records. Whereas if you go somewhere you've never been before, you haven't got a clue, you know.
Yeah. Did you ever think about, this is something that I've talked to people about recently, is the kind of the pacing and the kind of up and down of the energy of a dance floor. And
yeah.
Rather than thinking, I've got to keep this lot dancing all night, thinking you've got to have downtime so that they'll go and get off the dance floor and get a drink, because ultimately where you're getting booked needs to make money. Yeah. Like I'd never really thought of it like that until these recent conversations.
I heard something about that on, you listen to the Road podcast, the guys from Vegas?
A couple of them.
Yeah. So they were talking about how some DJs in Vegas had experiences of like doing, I think, what they call like a turnover, where because the club would be open like from, you know, 10 till 8 in the morning, and they'd kind of like clear it out. So if there was a queue outside, the next lot of people could come in and you'd literally be like, you know, kind of doing starting from scratch again every 3 hours, because people will come and go through that time. Yeah. But yeah, the way things ebb and flow through a night's quite, that's definitely an acquired skill. You know, the more you do it, the more you get used to it. But it's, I don't know, I guess you can never like guarantee how it's going to work, but the more you play somewhere, you start to get a rough idea of, you know, when you can start dropping the big records and that kind of thing. Yeah. Did you start doing more in London then? Yeah, never like regularly, but yeah, definitely played, you know, certain places quite a bit over the years. I'm trying to think what I did. I did like Carnival once, and yeah, a few things around that way. I tended to like playing in London a bit more because you'd get I don't know, I felt like you could get away with more. Yeah. You know, the crowds are a little bit more open. You could get away with like maybe throwing on a few jungle records or some slightly less well-known hip-hop. And, you know, I used to like playing student towns, because student towns you can just play like whatever you want pretty much. You know, they'll go for it. But you can definitely get away with playing hip-hop and drum and bass more in a student town. if you're in the right place, you know.
Are you talking student towns like Bristol and Nottingham?
Yeah, those sort of places. Like I live not too far from Reading. You go to Reading or like Brighton, you know, anywhere with like a sort of decent student crowd. We go to like Swansea, you know, places like that. I never DJed in Swansea, but you could tell just going out, there'd be certain bars that cater more to the students, and you know, you can tell when you walk in what sort of music you might be able to get away with playing in there. But yeah, those sort of places are a little bit more relaxed, and you know.
Yeah, it must be nice knowing that you've got that versatility in you, that you can go and not overly worry about the type of place that you're being booked, because you've got so many different kind of weapons in your arsenal, if you like.
Yeah. I think my only regret is that Serato wasn't really around as much back then.
Yeah.
For a lot of the time I was doing it, so, you know, but often I wouldn't be doing it on my own, you know, like me and a friend of mine would sort of do it together, so you could kind of turn up with a bag and a box each. That should do you for like 4 hours. And we were quite in sync with what each other were going to do, you know, kind of found a common ground. I didn't really use Serato too much because I kind of stopped playing out. I think I got Serato in like 2008, and I did find it was a bit of hassle because a lot of places might not have turntables set up, they had CDJs.
Yeah. So you say you stopped playing out. What brought that on?
I think mainly there was like 2 people I was playing for that were putting on like events stopped. A couple of venues closed. It was kind of a mix of everything. Some of the places I had played out, I noticed, were leaning more towards booking like reality TV people to do DJ sets and that sort of nonsense. And
was that late 2000s then, mid to late?
Yeah, that was probably like, I was kind of still doing stuff, but it was more like going along with my friends and jumping on for a bit, you know, if they needed a break, and just sort of playing whatever they'd brought with them.
Yeah, but like Danny Dyer or Keith from The Office or something.
Yeah, and you just think this is just bollocks, and they're getting like 300-400 quid, and you're getting, you know, 50 quid or something. It wasn't really my thing. And also, I just started to notice that I wasn't as into the new stuff that maybe you play out. So I was probably buying keeping my own like R&B up until about 2004-05. And then I remember going into HMV, and the R&B section was like Pussycat Dolls, Rihanna, and something else. And I was like, I don't like this anymore. This isn't for me.
Yeah.
Because it kind of moved quite far away from the hip-hop side of it, you know. It wasn't as... and that whole horrible era of like that sort of EDM, R&B.
Yeah, I mean, there was one era, probably mid to late 2000s, where I think it was quite a no-no in a lot of places to play R&B, wasn't it?
Yeah, it kind of really died off for a bit. I mean, I'd kind of stopped paying attention, but all those kind of EDM things with R&B vocalists on, I just can't stand. And my main hate that I just will never really, it's absolutely anything with like auto-tune on it.
Right.
Just makes my skin crawl. So when that was like the big thing, I was like, no, I can't deal with this. I don't want to be anywhere near it. It just puts me in a bad mood. So yeah, I just kind of stopped listening to a lot of it, really. I think also I'd been working in a Virgin Megastore for about 5 years, and you just end up in the loop of everything that's out. And then once I stopped working there around about 2005, I didn't need to worry about what was in the charts anymore. So there was a bit of everything, and just also getting a bit older and the crowd getting younger. You know, there's like more of a gap between the people you're playing to. And the sort of, you start noticing that certain classics that used to go down really well, they just don't know them. You know, it's not they don't like them, that they just don't have that effect because they just have no idea what that song is. So yeah, it was a bit of everything. I didn't want to be doing it just for the sake of it, you know, sort of something I did for fun more than anything. So there was no reason to go out if it wasn't enjoyable, you know.
Yeah, I think you're the first person we've had on that's had quite a conscious few sort of touch points around what brought them to decide to stop.
Yeah.
Yes, it's nice to explore those. So in parallel with this, so you were working at the Virgin Megastore. Was that a conscious thing because of the DJing? Was it like, great, I can get some discounts, I can get first dibs on a load of records, that type of thing?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose at the time I wasn't sort of really, I never really kind of knew what I wanted to do for a job, and I was just kind of been doing like a bit of retail, you know. Then I'd kind of had an office job and it didn't work out, and yeah, there was a job at this Virgin place that had opened in Camberley, so I applied for that and got it. And I think one of the things I mentioned in the interview was that I think they'd asked me for like, how would you improve the store? And there was no specialist record shop in town at the time. And I said, you should start stocking vinyl. So a few weeks after I started there, the manager's like, right, we're going to start a little vinyl section. Can you look after it? So I kind of got like a little budget each week and a few distributors to talk to. And
nice.
Yeah, it was basically like my own little record shop in the corner of the store, because most of the stores are kind of graded by size, and the big ones stock everything. The middle ones have most things, and the smaller ones have just your kind of main titles.
Yeah.
So shops like that generally didn't have a vinyl section at all, but we started building it up, started getting quite big. And obviously I knew a lot of the people in the area. I knew garage was big. I knew a certain amount of people to buy some drum and bass, and build it up, really well. So, we were making a kind of significant amount of the takings each week could be from that little section. And obviously, discounts and promos and that kind of thing start to follow. So, when you're in I was like 22, 23, 24 doing that, it's quite a nice little job to have. So yeah, that kind of helped, and you get to meet a lot of other people doing it. I probably got maybe a few extra bookings off just working in that little shop, really, even though it wasn't like a specialist.
Yeah,
it's not like I'm working in like black market or anything, but yeah, it was good, man. Enjoyed it. But retail's got that kind of ceiling where the money's crap. You got to work every weekend. You can't really do it once you hit adulthood properly.
Yeah. So what did you move into from there full-time job wise then?
Again, bounced around temping office jobs a bit, and then eventually got a temp job in a mortgage lender, which is where I've ended up. So I think I started, my first mortgage job was like end of 2005, temping, and now I'm still not at the same company, but I'm still in the same industry. So, which, it's okay. It's Monday to Friday, it's decent hours, the money's all right, I can't moan too much.
Yeah, that's it. If it ticks enough of the boxes for you, and you understand it's not going to tick every box, then that's quite an important thing, I think. Because sometimes with the job you think, oh yeah, but it's not got this about it, but you're forgetting all the good things it does have.
Yeah, there's that. I mean, while I was working at Virgin, I was thinking, right, I could be, because I was speaking to a lot of distributors while I was doing the buying. I was like, I think I, might like to do that. And I had a job at the head office for a bit, working with the buying team, and I had quite a good head for picking out what might sell, in terms of like new releases and things. And then gradually the internet starts to impact on everything a bit more. So a lot of record companies shut down, like places I'd applied at, distributors start closing, shops start closing. So yeah, it all kind of coincided with it being a good time to get out, really,
Yeah. So speaking of the internet, that's a nice little segue. So you had a pretty successful blog, didn't you, in what I would say is the first generation of blogs, and it's a time that I absolutely loved in terms of musical discovery because of sites like RapidShare and ZShare, all these kind of file hosting websites. There was quite a few blogs. There was yours and a load of other ones, and I probably gravitated more towards the jazz ones, jazz and funk ones. But you had Only Built for ZShare Links, which I think is an amazing name.
I came up with the name before I had an idea of what to do with the blog. Really. I thought, I need to do something with that title now. So yeah, that was the start from there.
Sometimes you just need that idea, and then the rest of it looks after itself.
Well, yeah, I mean, the title popped up. Really, it was more, it was that sort of era where the blog, the blogs were updating with new music every day, and there was like Nah Right, and You Heard That New, and all these sort of sites. And I was living with a friend of mine at the time who was also into hip hop, and you'd like get him from work and start checking what was out, and you could literally come home, get a new mixtape, a couple of new freestyles, and that was like throughout the week you'd pick up quite a lot of good new music. And I think I just had the idea of what if those sites were around, 10, 15 years ago. You'd be coming home and seeing, there's like Philmatic's coming out, tracks leaked to Philmatic, or, there's a new Snoop freestyle, or all these sort of things. So I had a box under my bed with all these tapes in that I hadn't touched for ages, and I kind of needed to make a bit of space, really. You start accumulating more and more junk and need to not have too much clutter. So as I was going through them, I thought, right, there's a lot of stuff on these tapes that hasn't been online, and a lot of people probably haven't heard, especially if you're outside the UK. It's like UK radio. So I kind of figured out how I could convert it onto MP3 and started uploading a few bits. I think the first thing I put up was maybe Snoop and the Dog Pound on Westwood. There was a freestyle when he came over in '94, and there was a Jam Master Jay DJ set, like an old school hip hop weekend on Radio 1. So I had some things like that. And then just started picking out freestyles and things. And I was just kind of doing like highlights from the tapes at first, because I don't know, I guess SoundCloud and Mixcloud weren't around, I don't think. So it was easier just to do small files every day. But it started getting quite popular. I was kind of just posting links on a few message boards and things. And people were quite into it. But it was stuff that hadn't been shared. I didn't want to be one of the sites that just kind of regurgitated content from another site and put it up there. I thought that's not really worth my time. But
I think at that time, because you still had to kind of somewhat discover it and somewhat find your way to find the right sites for the right stuff. I think although it was digital, so it's kind of easily distributed, there was still something special in that journey, like when you got the tape packs and you got the tape handed down that's been copied by so and so, and it's got 15 dubbings worth of tape hiss on it, but it's still got on what you want, and it's still really sought after. It was still a really nice time, I think, for that sort of musical discovery.
Yeah, you definitely had to know where to look, and not too many people were uploading full tapes at that point for one reason or another. I started kind of doing a few. It was probably just the file size, maybe put me off doing it, I don't know. But I'd start pulling out some mixtapes I had that I'd got from back in the day, and tapes of old rap radio, that kind of thing. And then what I did find would help was I could then post my mixes, and I had a little audience that were there to listen to what I was doing as well. And at the time, this was, I started the blog in March 2009. And I think I'd put a couple of mixes up before that. But, even at the time, people were quite happy to get a full mix for free online. Something you could burn to CD and listen to. Whereas obviously now it got to a point, people started taking it all a bit for granted because there was just so much out there, and YouTube and Mixcloud and SoundCloud, and you got so much stuff to listen to that people would be like, all right, yeah, another thing's been uploaded, and they'll go give it a quick glance and move on.
Yeah, you do drown, I think, now in content. But it's interesting that you say about putting your own mixes on there, because one of the first things you learn if you ever study marketing is like the 80-20 rule.
Right.
So it's kind of having that altruism and making 80% of what you do not about you and your product or service. So you probably kind of just naturally did that.
Yeah.
So then, like you say, you've got this primed audience ready, who believe in you and support you.
Yes.
As well. So was that the first thing that you did where you would kind of class yourself as being a music historian?
Yeah, I guess so. It was certainly it was just to me it was kind of an extension of what I'd always liked doing, which was making people tapes and sharing music and that kind of thing. So I was like, look at this. And it kind of got to a point later on where I think people were maybe flexing a bit and like, oh, I've got this, so I'm not going to upload it, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, it's just like, look at all this cool stuff. Let's put it out there so everybody can hear it. And there's people that weren't old enough, or, if it was something from Capital or Kiss, you had to be not only in the UK, but in London to have heard it. And you'd have had to have been listening at a certain time and recording it. So it becomes more and more niche as you sort of go further down the line. And it's funny, as I sort of went on, people would start sending me tapes, and every now and again, there'd be certain shows that it seemed everybody had recorded, even ones that didn't have anything particularly noteworthy on it. But I swear I got sent the same Westwood show from March 96 about 5 times. And there was no guest on it or anything. It was literally just tunes, but it seemed like everybody had been at home recording that night. So, I kind of worked my way through the box I had eventually, and then reached out to a few other people, DJ MK, who I'd bought a lot of tapes off back in the day. So I knew he'd still have some, so he sort of gave me a few. Tobes, who used to do Spine Magazine, which was another site, he had a lot of tapes. He's a good mate of DJ Yoda as well, so he put me in touch with Yoda, who also, let me take a few from his collection. So, I kind of was reaching out to a lot of people, and there was a few other sites doing it at the same time, like Random Rap Radio. So I ended up meeting up with Craig and kind of trading a few things. And there was quite a good little online community, you know. The only thing that was always a bit annoying was that everybody had this same little box that I had somewhere in their house or at their parents' house, and you'd get so many like, oh yeah, I've got all these tapes, I'll rep them, I'll sort you out, and you just never hear from them again. It was maybe like one in 50. It'd be, oh yeah, I'll definitely have to do that. And there was sort of periods where people would start their own blog and start posting things, but a lot of them wouldn't last very long because it's kind of time consuming, or you know, they just maybe don't get the response they wanted from doing it. So in the early blog era, there was a few, you know, blogs started, they do like 6 posts and then it vanishes again. Or you'd get DJs like Stretch Armstrong who'd maybe rip a few tapes and then wouldn't post anything for 4 years. And that happened again in lockdown once everybody was at home. You know, DJs started like, oh, you know, let's rip some tapes and put them out. And then as soon as they could go back outside again, it just stops. And you think there's still all these boxes of tapes that we haven't heard. We need to hear them, but you know, you kind of have to, you can't obsess over it too much or it'll drive you mad.
No, that's it.
Yeah.
So from the point that you closed the blog, were you then kind of like, right, what can I do next? Or did you have a bit of time and all of a sudden just kind of think it'd be really cool to do this book?
Yeah, I kind of didn't really consciously stop the blog. I just ran out of stuff to post.
Right.
It got to a point where I didn't have any tapes left. And I'd kind of like put the odd thing up here and there, but I was like, I don't want to kind of just start putting stuff up for the sake of it. And also I'd like moved in with my now wife at the time, so that kind of starts to restrict the amount of time you can spend dicking around converting old tapes. So yeah, I think 2017 I had the idea for the book, but I'd always wanted to write something. And I'd done like a few interviews on the blog over the years. I'd had DJ 7L from Sarface, Big Ted, Chubby Kids, J Love, Kaiser. I've done like about 5 or 6 interviews on the blog, which I quite enjoyed doing. So I hadn't really been able to come up with a concept for a book that I thought was feasible. And then one night it kind of popped into my head. I went through a phase, as I still do now and again, of not being able to sleep properly. And about 2 a.m, I thought, book about jungle. And started kind of putting the feelers out for who I might be able to talk to and how I'd be able to do it. So yeah, it was probably like a bit of a moment where I wasn't really playing out anywhere. And I'd kind of thought I was not really something I want to do at the moment. And yeah, probably just a case of wanting to still be involved somehow, but in a, I don't know, maybe like a different way to what I've done already.
Hey guys, I hope you're enjoying Once a DJ. I wanted to create a product for the listeners to be able to support the show and for the guests as a token of gratitude for being on. So I've teamed up with Sure Shot Shop to create some Once a DJ 45 RPM adapter clamps. These are my weapon of choice as a 45 adapter, as they add stability and grip to aid you in any setup. These are available for £25 each plus flat fee postage from onceadj.bigcartel.com. And if you'd like to see the other models you can buy and also customise, check out sureshotshop.com. If you're an avid collector of timeless music on vinyl but don't have the budget to fork out for those pricey originals, then look no further than Be With Records. From library music to yacht rock, jazz, hip-hop, disco and beyond, Be With lovingly reissue some of the coolest classics. All of their records are carefully remastered and cut to the highest standards to make sure the pressings are of peak audio quality and do justice to the music being released. And something else to note is that they don't do limited runs to drive up resale and hype. If the demand is there, they'll repress, as the focus is the music, not the profit margin. They have flat rate shipping and free UK shipping on orders over £60. And if you head to bewithrecords.com and use the discount code ONCEADJ, all one word, you'll get 10% off your order. So head to bewithrecords.com and level up those crates today. Yeah, and I think Jungle's got such an interesting story to tell, hasn't it? You know, we touched upon the kind of the coming together of everything at once in that sort of late 80s period, and then how it fell out in those different directions, you know, the house, the breakbeat hardcore, the hip house, the hip hop. And, you know, it's such an interesting time. And I think what you maybe get now with music, like I'm quite keen to do a podcast about UK hip hop. because I think that's another story that just doesn't really get told. And I think in the wake of how massive grime has gotten,
Yeah.
a lot of stuff just gets forgotten about now because that's so big. But I think things like jungle in particular, garage, and UK hip hop all have quite a lot to contribute to that, and they're all quite easily forgotten, the stories and the movements. So I think it's something great to get into. How did you find the early days of reaching out to people? Was it quite difficult to convince them to come on board, or were people really happy to do it?
Not really. I mean, I did the initial concept was just to like cover the big tunes, like the big rave tunes. So kind of like 93 to 96-ish.
Yeah.
And it was quite a small scene, so the people I had to talk to was sort of a given for the most part. There was only kind of a certain amount of established names in that period. You know, it was very UK based. Most of it was London. So I think I was just sort of finding people on social media, or social media is kind of like my last resort, because I sort of envisage these people's inboxes just get clogged up with all sorts of SoundCloud links or whatever and spam. So I was kind of more searching for like email addresses and more sort of professional ways of contacting them. And I think I just did pick like 3 or 4 at random, and a couple of people came back to me. So the first one I did was DJ Rap, and then I did like Man P Swift, who are probably 2 of the bigger names in the book, to be honest. Once you kind of speak to them, and I'd like explain to Swift in particular, I had a chat with him about what I was doing, and he was quite encouraging about it. And yeah, I think, you know, once you sort of see these established names, are like, yeah, this is a good idea. It hasn't been done before. You know, good luck with it, this and the other. Yeah, it gives you a bit more motivation to crack on with it. And some of the artists were, you know, they're not active necessarily anymore. They're a little bit harder to find. But most of the people I approached were like, you know, up for doing it. Some of the bigger names, obviously, a little bit harder to pin down, although I have found big names will have a manager or a PA that will organise these things for them, or at least, you know, like somebody that runs their label for them that will sort of manage their diary. They're almost a little bit easier to get hold of because of that. Whereas if you're kind of trying to get hold of somebody that does everything themselves, or that maybe has a day job as well as a production and DJ, it's a bit harder to get a definite day and time out of them. But it was, you know, very much like a learning curve. I'd never done anything like that before, so it was just a case of kind of wanting to document a scene that hadn't been documented very well. At the time, nobody really wrote about it. If you look at the dance music magazines from that time, they're very house and techno and trance focused. Jungle wasn't really taken too seriously, I don't think. Apart from a handful of people like Goldie and Ronnie Size and Bookham, you wouldn't kind of get a feature on Mickey Finn or Ray Keefe or anything like that. And you know, the records were like selling a lot, but they weren't selling through like HMVs and Virgins. They were selling in like independent shops, so they weren't necessarily charting and that kind of thing. So there wasn't really a lot of information out there. There'd been 2 books, All Cruise and State of Base, but they'd been written at the time in the 90s, you know, rather than kind of looking back on the impact everything had since. So I think the fact it hadn't been done before was like, people thought, yeah, this is a good idea, you know, it's quite unique. And again, same as a blog, I guess, not wanting to kind of like regurgitate content or anything, just sort of create something original that's fill a bit of a gap in the market, I guess.
And so how did you come across Eddie, who did the photography in the book?
So after I'd done a few interviews, I started realising I was going to need some images to accompany it, rather than just having big blocks of text. And again, it being when it was pre-camera phones and whatever, there's not a lot of photos online. You know, generally at raves, you didn't get a lot of photos anyway. It's not an ideal environment, and people are doing certain things that they don't want pictures being taken of and that sort of thing. So I had a look online, and there was a couple of people's names seemed to be like the main, the people that have been doing it the most. But Eddie's name kept popping up, and I found him on Twitter. And when I'd searched him, I also noticed he'd done all the photos of Wu, and he'd done like Biggie and Aaliyah and all these people, and I sort of recognised, and he'd done a few covers for Raucous. I think he did like the Black Star Definition, like things I had in my on my shelf. I didn't sort of realise it was him at the time. So I found him on Twitter, and he phoned me up about half an hour later after I messaged him. Said he'd been kind of looking for something to do with this archive of photos he'd had. So he'd been taking photos for Goldie at the Metalheads nights, but he'd also just been going out around London in the 90s and taking photos while he was at raves. So he said, I've got this whole archive no one's really seen before. Let's meet up and have a chat. And he liked the idea. He kind of gave me a few pointers on, the concepts and suggestions. Also managed to hook me up with a few people like Goldie, arranged interviews, things like that. So, he was still sort of quite in the loop and friends with a few people, from the industry, which helped. Some of the photos we couldn't use are brilliant. If the book could have been bigger, but we were trying to keep the cost down. You kind of want it to be affordable rather than some massive like 50 quid thing.
It's a beautiful book. It is really nice.
Yeah, it did come out really well in the end. We met up with, I'd approached a couple of publishers and there was a record label we spoke to. We met with BBE actually, because Eddie had done some stuff for them. And they liked the idea of it, but they'd have kind of left us to it and just put it out. So I thought, I'm not sure I've got the know-how or the time to figure out how to get all this done. Yeah. And I'd approached a couple of publishers who were quite keen on it, but for one reason or another couldn't put it out. And then Colin Stephen, who published Knowledge magazine, which was like the main sort of drum and bass magazine for most of the 90s and into the early 2000s. He'd started a publishing company and put a couple of books out. I reached out to him, had a meeting, and he liked the idea. And obviously him knowing about drum and bass and everything already, we didn't kind of have to sell it too hard to him. He's kind of understood what we were trying to do, and obviously he could look at all the names I'd interviewed and knew who they all were, which helped, whereas there was always that danger of going to a publishing house and them just not understanding or not recognising anything of, what I was trying to do with this concept. That was quite a good fit with Velocity Press, really. Colin kind of, got the concept straight away. And again, put me in touch. He made a few suggestions, put me in touch with a couple of people to get the final handful of interviews done. So I ended up going from my initial idea of 93 to 96 to going from 1990 to 98 and covered a whole decade, which sort of made more sense in hindsight.
I think that's great, though, if you can get that person with a bit of experience. And as well with Velocity Press, they do quite a lot of books around DJing and DJ culture as well, don't they? So it's probably a really good fit.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, at the time, I think he'd put out maybe 3 books. And by the time mine came out, it was probably the 5th or 6th that he published, I think. But yeah, he's had a really good run, some quite niche concepts along some more mainstream, he's done one on Daft Punk, for example, which is probably a bit more wide range and wide appeal.
Yeah.
But he was really good to work with. I mean, when he started, he was just sort of a one-man band, but he was very kind of open to ideas and hands-on and a lot of good suggestions, hooked us up with a good designer who worked on the layout with us. This was what I was mentioning earlier. I had to relinquish a bit of control because I had no idea what I was doing. I sort of presented them with the text, how I wanted it to look. And they'd come back and go, is this okay? And I'd be like, yeah, this is, But I was quite keen to keep it about the vinyl. Each chapter's got a record. That was always the original concept. Because a lot of these things can go off on tangents and they start talking a bit too much about maybe the drugs and the raves and or they get a bit too much into social commentary and this sort of thing. I really wanted to keep it strictly on the music and just let the people that were there tell their stories.
Yeah, I think sometimes if books are a bit too journalistic, you can run out of steam with them as well if they're written in certain ways. Whereas if you've got that structure, it's cool. What's quite nice with a book like that is it's easy to pick up and put down.
Yeah.
And also, I've been listening to there's a Spotify playlist someone's made of all the tunes that are on Spotify.
Yeah,
they're not all on there, but it's just quite nice to have that point of reference as well. Because there's a good few of the tunes I recognise, but I pretty much wouldn't know 95% of the titles of them.
Right, okay.
So it's nice to have that and understand the bits.
Okay.
And the kind of social conditions and things like that some of these tunes came from and which elements of the melting pot musically that we've discussed resulted in these certain tunes as well. It's really interesting like that. And you've done the record now, haven't you?
Yeah, that the concept of that came around just after the book had been published. I mean, it would have been nice to have them drop at the same time, but there's I think Colin had been talking to Above Board, who did they did an album, Fabio and Groove Rider, like a 30 Years of Rage album, and they put out like a lot of new stuff, mainly kind of house and techno and electronica based, but they've done like a few other things, and they thought, of the titles from Velocity's catalogue, this would be a good one to do a pairing of, really do a little joint venture. So I got the task of trying to collate a track list, which was quite cool. For all this time, like I was saying about sharing music, you go from recording songs on the radio to DJing, and it's like the final level. You get a compilation album out.
Yeah.
But it was a lot harder than I anticipated, and I think a lot harder than the guys at Above Board anticipated, because licensing these days, I don't know about all genres, but certainly for drum and bass, proved quite difficult in some instances, whether it be labels just not wanting to license tunes because maybe they feel it takes away a bit of their immediate revenue from streaming, or if they want to repress something, or just asking for too much money. Whereas, we did, the initial run for the album was there's two double vinyl sets, and we did 500 of each to start with. And obviously you have to keep that cost effective. So if somebody's asking for the Earth, you can't use that tune. So I think my initial idea was like, let's get loads of like unreleased dub plates and tunes no one's ever heard and put them out, but that wasn't happening. So it was a bit of trial and error. I kind of wanted a mix of maybe a few obscure bits that people that buy vinyl might not have, some well-known things, and just like the book, try and cover like a lot of different eras and styles. My other thing was it couldn't just be all the tunes in the book, because then it's basically a Ministry of Sound Best of Jungle compilation. Most of those records in the book have been put out on every CD going. So just try and give people something that they might not have been able to get hold of, because if you go on Discogs, some of those tunes are very expensive. So I was the other thing was like, I'm just going to go through my wants list and try and get as many of these on there as possible.
Oh, nice.
Which kind of worked out. I got a few bits off the off the list and saved a bit of money, but it came out well, man. It's a nice little mix there.
I'm looking forward to checking it out. So I think it's probably a bit different with you to some of the other guests that we've had, because you've got quite a few different touch points around the passion. So what I normally ask people is about any one piece of advice you'd give to, say, a DJ that's starting out. But maybe with you, it's probably more a question of asking if you've got any key bits of advice just around following your passion.
I guess that in itself is like the bit of advice, really, is just do what you genuinely like and try not to be too swayed by fashions and trends and what you think might get you further, because inevitably there'll be someone that is passionate about that'll still do it better than you. If you're not really into it, you won't be able to do it for too long. And when it goes out of fashion, then you have to switch to something else. You're kind of always playing catch up. And I remember, for example, when around my area, a lot of people were playing garage. When that died down, then a lot of them tried to switch to playing hip hop and R&B. And to play hip hop and R&B and stuff, you kind of have to have that knowledge of how things work. You can't it's not like house, for example, where you can maybe pick up two tunes at the same BPM and they'll work. With hip hop, you sort of have to know the eras, the relationship between the artists, and there's a lot of different subgenres. You wouldn't necessarily turn up and play like a Black Alicious tune and then throw on like DMX, even though they're both hip hop. So I think taking that time and maybe just like focusing on what you genuinely enjoy and building that knowledge of it, it'll stand you in good stead for a longer period of time. The other thing I'd probably say is you can be a lot more adventurous now with the technology.
Yeah.
And for all the features and like bells and whistles that you get with these gadgets, it seems like you do still get a lot of people just playing the big tunes and not really doing much with them. So if you put that extra effort in, it makes you stand out a bit more, I think. I've always liked messing around with acapellas and things, so I haven't got into Serato stems yet. I've only just set all my stuff up this week after 6 months of being boxed up. But
yeah, I've got this sometimes unpopular opinion that I think Serato stems is going to do more bad than good.
Quite possibly, yeah.
So for anyone who's listening who doesn't really know what this is, effectively Serato is the kind of an industry standard digital DJing solution where you DJ with your MP3s and you have files and things. And what it now does is it can strip out acapellas, it can strip out the drums, it can strip out bass lines, and it can strip out everything else. So you can kind of do loads and loads of live remixing. there's a lot of other tools that it has that make things easier. But my concern is if people kind of do these things by numbers without trusting their ears, we're probably going to get a lot more train wrecks than really nice blends.
Yes.
With great power comes great responsibility.
Yeah, and I guess, you know, if I went back to some old mixtapes, there's probably some things on there that don't sound great. But I think you have to allow a certain amount of, you know, learning curves and things like that. I think maybe the difference back then was you practiced in private, and when you kind of felt you were at a certain level, then you'd play out, whereas it seems to have got to a point where people have just learn in public now. You know, so it's, again, you've got to have a lot of confidence to do that. I think there was some people wouldn't want to do it until they're absolutely sure they could do it properly, whereas some people just want to be seen to be doing it, and the actual end product of it isn't as important as them being able to go up there and be like, hi, I'm a DJ. So it's, you know, it attracts different people now. You know, you get a lot of DJs looking like models, which you never used to get.
Yeah. That's a whole other conversation in itself.
Yeah.
Where can people find you online, Paul?
Mainly Twitter. I am at Paul DJ Step 1. I'm on Instagram. I don't like Instagram. I do use it occasionally. Yeah, obviously if you Google Paul Terzulli, there's not a lot of them, so I'm quite easy to find generally. If you Google Who Say Reload, the book comes up, my name. You can get me through Velocity Press website, anything like that.
Brilliant. And is the record through the website as well, or is that somewhere else?
Yeah, you can order through Velocity. I think most places now have got it, like Juno and Chemical and them sort of places. So it's, I think with Volume 1, they might be going for a repress on that, because that kind of went quite quickly, and Volume 2 came out end of March. So they are 2 double packs, 8 tunes on each one, so it's 2 tunes a side. So it's nice loud pressing, very good quality, a few rare bits on there, some anthems, and total package looks nice. We've got these photography on the front, back, and on the insert. So yeah, and there's digital as well on the on Bandcamp.
Cool. Well, thanks very much for your time.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man. It's been interesting.
Excellent. Right. Well, speak to you soon.
Yes, we'll do. Nice one.
Take care, mate.
Cheers, mate. Bye.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Once a DJ. If you'd like to support the show, then head to onceadj.com/support to find out how you can help. If you'd like to get in touch with any feedback or suggestions, email onceadjpodcast@gmail.com. Once a DJ is produced by the good people at Remote Control. If you'd like to find out more about working with them, head to remote-ctrl.co.uk.
Was nice.